Have you ever noticed how spiritual ideas evolve over time, not just within individual lives, but across entire traditions? Today we're going to explore how the concept of divine sonship, being called a son of God, develops across three key traditions: the Old Testament, the New Testament, and esoteric teachings. These traditions may seem distinct, but they are actually part of a continuity and progression that mirrors the journey of spiritual development we all undergo. This journey begins with an external hierarchical view of divinity, where sonship is conferred upon divine beings or certain chosen people. It progresses to the New Testament's deepening understanding of sonship as being inherently tied to divine nature, culminating in esoteric teachings that invite us to see the divine spark within each of us, waiting to be awakened. As we walk through these traditions, you'll notice that this evolution, from external to internal, from function to essence, and from collective to individual realization, mirrors a spiritual path we all take. Let's dive into this progression using four key triads: origin, nature, purpose, and manifestation of sonship, showing how each step builds upon the last, leading to a more profound and personal understanding of our divine connection. The origin of divine sonship reveals the foundation of how spiritual connection is first understood, and we see a shift from an external to an internal discovery. In the Old Testament, the sons of God refer to angels or divine beings created by God as part of His heavenly court. Their sonship is conferred upon them due to their role as God's servants, beings who carry out His will, as seen in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, and Job chapter 1, verse 6. These beings are not divine in essence, but are marked by their role in the created order. Here we see a view of sonship that is hierarchical and external to the beings themselves. It's not an inherent quality. It is bestowed upon them as part of their divine function. The shift begins in the New Testament with Jesus. His sonship is not conferred or created. It is begotten, eternally linked to God. As John chapter 3 verse 16 tells us, Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. This is a radical evolution of the concept, where sonship is not about fulfilling a role or being created by God, but being of the same divine essence as God Himself. Jesus' sonship points to a deeper ontological truth. He is one with the Father from the very beginning, as stated in John chapter 1 verses 1 to 2, reflecting a sonship that is eternal and intrinsic, not external or assigned. Finally, esoteric traditions like Gnosticism introduce a third dimension, self-realized sonship. According to these teachings, the divine sonship lies within every individual. We all possess a latent divine spark, and the journey of sonship is about awakening to this truth. As the Gospel of Thomas suggests, the kingdom of God is not something outside of us, but something within. Sonship here is a matter of recognition and self-realization, not of being chosen or created. The progression of sonship from external origins in the Old Testament to an internal realization in esoteric thought represents a profound shift in how divinity is understood. In the Old Testament, sonship is primarily external, conferred upon created beings like angels who serve as God's messengers. Their sonship comes from being part of God's heavenly court, fulfilling their roles within the divine hierarchy. Here, sonship is defined by function and proximity to God, rather than by any inherent divine quality within the being itself. It is bestowed from above, emphasizing a clear separation between creator and creation. In contrast, the New Testament introduces a radical shift with Jesus. His sonship is not conferred or created, but begotten, eternally linked to God, revealing a deeper ontological connection between the Father and the Son. Jesus' sonship points to an essential oneness with God, which is far more intimate than anything seen in the Old Testament. Here, the origin of sonship becomes divine and eternal, rooted in Jesus' very being. This signals a movement towards understanding sonship as something intrinsic to the nature of God, rather than as an external designation. Finally, esoteric traditions push this evolution even further, suggesting that sonship is something that can be self-realized by every human being. Here, the divine is not only reserved for certain beings, but is a latent potential within all people. Each individual carries within them a divine spark, and the journey to sonship is about awakening to this inner truth. This represents the culmination of the movement from external to internal, from seeing divine sonship as something that happens to beings by divine decree, to recognizing it as something that can be discovered and nurtured within ourselves. Thus, the progression of the origin of sonship traces a spiritual journey from seeing the divine as an external force to realizing that the divine is something that dwells within. The nature of sonship shows us what it means to be a son of God and how this understanding deepens over time. In the Old Testament, the sons of God are functionaries, divine beings fulfilling tasks on God's behalf. Their sonship is about function, not essence. They serve as messengers or intermediaries, and while they are part of God's spiritual family, they do not share in God's essence. Their identity is tied to what they do, not who they are. In the New Testament, the nature of Jesus' sonship is different. Jesus is not merely an agent of God's will, he is one with God. His sonship is ontological. It's not about what he does, but who he is. In John chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," pointing to his divine essence. This is a significant progression. Jesus' sonship is about being divine in nature, not just function. In esoteric thought, the nature of sonship is not about function or even being inherently divine from birth. It's about potential. Every human being has within them the potential for divinity. The nature of sonship in Gnosticism is about recognizing that divine spark within ourselves and realizing our own potential to become one with the divine through spiritual awakening. In the Old Testament, the nature of sonship is functional. The sons of God are divine agents who carry out God's commands, and their sonship is primarily expressed through service and role. This idea reflects a worldview where divine beings are created to fulfill specific duties. Their sonship is important, but it is derivative. It is not a matter of being divine in essence, but rather of serving the divine order. This limited view of sonship emphasizes obedience, hierarchy, and task-oriented roles within the cosmic order. With the arrival of Jesus in the New Testament, we see a monumental shift. Jesus' sonship is not just about what he does, but about who he is. His sonship is ontological, meaning that his very essence is divine. Jesus is one with the Father. His sonship is rooted in his unity with God. This deepens the concept of sonship from something functional to something inherent and eternal. The nature of his sonship reflects an unbreakable bond with God, showing that to be the Son of God is to share in God's divine essence. This introduces a much richer and fuller understanding of sonship, where the relationship with God is not just about fulfilling a divine role, but about embodying the divine nature itself. Esoteric traditions take this understanding even further by suggesting that all people have the potential for divine sonship. Here, the nature of sonship is not something confined to Jesus alone. It is about realizing the divine potential within each person. In Gnostic thought, the nature of sonship is linked to spiritual awakening. The idea that by attaining gnosis, knowledge, individuals can awaken the divine spark within them and become one with the divine. This view shifts the focus from an exclusive sonship tied to Jesus to a universal sonship that can be realized by anyone who pursues spiritual enlightenment. The progression in the nature of sonship from function, Old Testament, to being, New Testament, to potential, Gnostic, reflects a deepening awareness of what it means to be a son of God. It marks a shift from performing divine tasks to being divine in essence, to realizing one's own divinity, a journey from serving to being to becoming. The purpose of sonship evolves from serving God's will to bringing salvation, to personal spiritual liberation. In the Old Testament, the purpose of divine sonship is service. The sons of God act as messengers, carrying out God's commands, maintaining divine order, and representing his will. Similarly, Israel is referred to as God's son, tasked with fulfilling the covenant and being a light to the nations. The purpose is external. Sonship is about representing God in the world. Jesus' sonship serves the purpose of redemption. His role as the Son of God is central to his mission of reconciling humanity with God through his life, death, and resurrection. This purpose is no longer just about service or representation, but is about restoring the relationship between God and humanity, bringing salvation and healing. In Gnostic thought, the purpose of sonship is to liberate the individual from the material world and lead them to spiritual enlightenment. By realizing one's divine nature, a person transcends ignorance and returns to the divine source. The purpose of sonship is now focused on personal spiritual evolution, finding freedom and enlightenment through self-realization. The purpose of divine sonship evolves significantly across the three traditions. In the Old Testament, the purpose of sonship is primarily about service and representation. The sons of God, angels, act as divine messengers and intermediaries, carrying out God's commands in both the celestial and earthly realms. Their role is to maintain divine order and represent God's will. Similarly, when Israel is referred to as God's son, the purpose is to fulfill the covenant and act as a witness to the nations, showing God's glory through their faithfulness. The emphasis here is on external responsibility. Sonship is tied to acting on behalf of God and serving His purpose in the world. In the New Testament, the purpose of sonship takes on a far deeper meaning. Jesus' sonship is about redemption and salvation. His role as the Messiah is not just to represent God, but to reconcile humanity to God through His life, death, and resurrection. Jesus' sonship has a redemptive purpose, to restore the broken relationship between humanity and God, offering forgiveness and the promise of eternal life. This shift marks a move from the external task of service to an internal transformation of humanity through divine grace. Jesus' purpose as the Son of God is not just to mediate God's will, but to be the means by which humanity is saved and restored to its divine potential. Esoteric traditions take this even further by focusing on the self-liberation of the individual. In Gnosticism, the purpose of sonship is to transcend the material world and achieve spiritual enlightenment. By awakening to their own divine nature, individuals can escape the limitations of the physical realm and return to the divine source. The purpose of sonship in this tradition is deeply personal and transformational. It's about self-realization and the attainment of higher knowledge that leads to spiritual freedom. Sonship here becomes a means of liberation, not just for the collective, but for the individual soul. The progression in the purpose of sonship, from service to redemption to self-liberation, reflects an evolving spiritual narrative. It moves from external duty and representing God's will, Old Testament, to redeeming humanity through Jesus, New Testament, to the personal journey of liberation and enlightenment in Gnostic thought. This mirrors the spiritual development from collective responsibility, through the gift of salvation, to the individual realization of divine potential. How does sonship manifest in the world? This triad traces the shift from external actions to internal transformation. In the Old Testament, sonship is manifested through function. The sons of God are messengers and agents of God's will, fulfilling divine commands, appearing to humans, and maintaining the balance of creation. Their manifestation is through action. What they do reflects their sonship. For Jesus, sonship is manifested through the incarnation, the Word made flesh, John 1:14. Jesus not only acts as a messenger of God's will, but embodies divinity. His life, miracles, death, and resurrection incarnate the divine nature, showing that sonship can be fully embodied in the world through divine mission. In Gnostic thought, sonship is manifested through personal transformation. As individuals attain gnosis, they awaken to their divine potential and live in accordance with their true spiritual nature. Sonship manifests as an inner transformation where one transcends the material world and embodies the divine through their awakened consciousness. How sonship is manifested in the world also follows a fascinating progression from external function to internal transformation. In the Old Testament, the manifestation of sonship is through action. The sons of God are recognized by their function as divine agents who carry out God's will. They are messengers, intermediaries, and enforcers of divine order. Their sonship is made visible through their service to God, and they are defined by their ability to interact with both the divine and human realms. Here, Sonship is expressed through what one does, rather than who one is. In the New Testament, Jesus' sonship is manifested through the incarnation. The Word became flesh in John 1:14, and Jesus embodies divinity in his human form. His sonship is not just about fulfilling tasks, but about embodying the divine essence in a human life. Through his teachings, miracles, death, and resurrection, Jesus manifests his sonship by revealing the nature of God through his life and mission. The focus here shifts from acting on behalf of God to being God among humanity. The incarnation is the ultimate manifestation of sonship. It is God becoming human to reveal divine truth and offer salvation. Esoteric traditions take this idea a step further, suggesting that sonship is manifested through personal transformation. In Gnostic thought, once individuals awaken to their divine nature, they are transformed from within. Their sonship is not merely about performing external acts or even embodying divine truth in a physical form. It is about an inner awakening that leads to a profound transformation of consciousness. As they attain spiritual knowledge, gnosis, they transcend the limitations of the material world and begin to live in alignment with their true divine nature. Sonship here is expressed through an internal realization that radically changes how one interacts with the world, moving from material attachments to a focus on spiritual truth. The progression in the manifestation of sonship, from external function, Old Testament, to incarnation, Jesus in the New Testament, to inner transformation, Gnosticism, reflects a deepening of spiritual understanding. It shows a movement from acting in service of the divine to embodying divinity, to transforming oneself from within to live in accordance with the divine nature. This mirrors a spiritual journey from focusing on external actions to embodying divine purpose, to transforming one's inner being through the realization of divine sonship. The continuity and progression of divine sonship across these traditions mirror our own spiritual development. We begin by seeing divinity as external, something conferred upon us by a higher power. As we grow spiritually, we come to understand that divine essence resides within, that we are not just followers of God, but participants in his divine nature. This journey, from external to internal, from role to being, and from collective to individual, encourages us to recognize the divine within ourselves. The call of sonship is universal, inviting each of us to awaken to our divine potential and embody it in the world. How might this progression of divine sonship shape your own spiritual journey? Can you move from looking outward for divinity to realizing the divine spark within? The path is open and the invitation is eternal.